change very soon.
Well, thank you very much. Mr. Tousaw, I think you made a comment that you don't think Ontario's plan to have this government monopoly is workable. Could you expand on that?
I certainly could, and thank you for your question. There are a number of practical difficulties with a government monopoly coupled with a federal jurisdiction over production. Let's take a simple example. Presumably the government of Ontario is seeking to exert its purchasing power to try to negotiate lower per gram costs of purchasing cannabis from the federally licensed producers. If those federally licensed producers, all of whom currently have direct-to-retail distribution systems in place, are not satisfied with Ontario's offer to purchase the cannabis, they may well just decline to sell to them, in which case consumers in Ontario will essentially have no access to cannabis through Ontario's government monopoly model. Certainly, if I were running a licensed producer and Ontario tried to come in and suggest to me that I should sell to them for $3 or $4 a gram, and I'm selling direct to consumer currently in other provinces for $8 to $12 a gram, why would I sell to Ontario? And then you have a situation in which residents of Ontario either don't have access or they have to go through the artificial step of obtaining a doctor's prescription so that they can then access the medical cannabis model, which would give them direct access to the licensed producers. That's one small problem among many. Another problem is that there's already a very vibrant distribution system operating in the gray market in Ontario. There's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 to 200 private dispensaries selling cannabis to consumers in Ontario right now. These entities are not just going to disappear. And if you don't transition the black market into the lawful market, then you're setting up a system of competition. The only way to shut down the competition is through the use of likely draconian police state tactics. Prohibition hasn't stopped any of these people from doing what they're doing. In fact, prohibition has led directly to the situation that we find ourselves in right now. So there's just no practical way. And here's what I think the fundamental misconception is. I think a lot of people think that legalizing cannabis is the creation of an industry. It's not the creation of an industry. The industry exists. It's vibrant. It's massive. There are literally thousands and thousands of people engaged and working in this industry in every province in this country. There are millions of different products out there. There are very sophisticated businesses working in this sector right now. And so we're not creating an industry. The best that we can hope for is to compete with the existing industry. And the best way to do that, as I say, is to transition those people that already have the expertise, that are already doing the job and doing it quite well and quite successfully, into the legal marketplace. Anything else is likely doomed to failure.
I think I'm out of time.
Yes, thanks very much. Mr. Davies.
Thank you, Mr. Tousaw. I'm going to be directing most of my questions at you. So I'll start with you. I think you very articulately described the problems with criminalization. And I think to give the government credit, I think that's something that it itself has recognized and is some of the fundamental rationale behind this bill. I think Prime Minister Trudeau has recognized that criminalization has simply pushed products underground and led to the creation of an illicit market that doesn't really work. You've also pointed out, though, that this bill, Bill C-45, essentially retains a criminalized approach to cannabis. It is criminal sanctions for possession over 30 grams. There's criminal sanctions for growing more than 4 plants. There's criminal sanctions for selling, in fact, with penalties up to 14 years. So if criminalization doesn't work generally, my question to you is it not somewhat misguided to sort of take a quasi-criminal approach to C-45? Or are we going to have problems down the road with the maintenance of the criminalized approach in this bill?
Oh, I think we're absolutely going to have problems with maintenance of a criminalized approach in this bill, and I think it's not just a little bit misguided, it's deeply misguided. Now, I think that there are probably some practical and some political reasons why the government has chosen to proceed in this fashion. The political reasons are quite clearly to legalize cannabis and to try to deflect political criticism from typically the right, but some aspects of the left, about this process and these steps that we're taking, and to try to therefore do it in the most small c conservative way possible. The practical consideration may well be that we know the Supreme Court of Canada in a ruling in the Malmo Levine case said that the Parliament retained the power to prohibit simple possession of cannabis as an aspect of criminal law power. If this is not a criminal law enterprise, it becomes a little less clear what the jurisdictional basis for the federal government's involvement in this area of commerce actually is. I think those are surmountable obstacles. At the end of the day, I think we need to look at just some fundamental fairness. Cannabis is safer than alcohol. Fundamentally, empirically, that is beyond question. Cannabis is safer than tobacco. There's no good reason why we're going to treat cannabis in a way that's significantly more strict than we do alcohol. Alcohol in our society is a source of tremendous harm, and it's also a source of tremendous pleasure and joy. I enjoy a good glass of wine. I like to go to my local vineyards. I'm a regular patron at the brewery, small craft brew pub down the street from my house. I have a keg of their beer in my garage. I'm not anti-alcohol, but I recognize the harm that it does to our society. All of those things, by the way, the vineyards down the road, here in the Cowichan Valley, we have probably 20 wonderful vineyards, many more in the interior of our province. The small craft brew industry that's rapidly growing here in British Columbia, those are provincially regulated enterprises, as well they should be. The federal government's role really ought to be minimized in this area. And quite frankly, with the greatest respect to what the government's done so far, it hasn't done a very good job regulating access to medical cannabis. The medical cannabis system that was started by court order in 2001 has been struck down by the courts repeatedly in litigation that I'm sure has cost the government of Canada tens of millions of dollars.
I'm going to stop you there because I've got a few other questions. I want to talk about edibles,
Sure.
concentrates, and other non-smokable products. Again, as you know, the government has not included those in this bill. I've gotten a number of different answers from the government. They say that it could happen imminently. It's down the road. They didn't have time to do it. I'm not quite sure. But given Colorado's experience and Washington and Alaska's with successful regulatory regimes about edibles, do you see any reason why we shouldn't put edibles and concentrates into the legal framework now? And what are the consequences of not doing so?
Well, in fact, there's every reason to put those products into the legal framework. The consequences of not doing so are the continuation and perpetuation of the black market, all the way from growing the raw plant material that you use to make the products through the point of sale. And in fact, we're seeing this even in municipal jurisdictions that are regulating cannabis dispensaries but have taken the step of banning edibles. People want these products. Consumers want these products. And anytime consumers demand a product, someone's going to rise to fill that demand.
Now, you just Sorry, you described the majority of people involved in the marijuana industry as law-abiding, nonviolent, entrepreneurial. These are the black market we talk about, really. I mean, there's a tendency to think Hell's Angels and organized crime, but you described a very different picture of the thousands of people who are currently involved in this industry. And you have said that we have to remember that virtually all of the cannabis produced and sold in this country right now is done so unlawfully. But if the government wants to eliminate that portion of the industry, this bill is not the way to go about doing it. Can you expand on that? Should we bring those people into the legal market? Does C-45 do that? And if not, what should we do to help facilitate that transition?
Not only should we do that, we have to do that for this to be successful in eliminating the black market. The fact of the matter is that there are tens of thousands of people, if not hundreds of thousands of people involved in the illicit industry today. I've represented many, many of these people. I'd invite them all to my home to have dinner with my family. They're wonderful, good people, and there's no reason for them to be considered or lumped into this category of organized crime with its connotations of violence and gang-related activity. That's just not what's going on. I think in perhaps thousands of disclosures that I've seen in criminal cases, a small fraction have contained any evidence of any involvement with what Canadians traditionally believe is organized crime. And you've heard from Professor Boyd, I believe, and his research in this area that shows 95% of people are not involved with organized crime. So how do we bring them out of the shadows and into the light? Well, we have to make it easy for them to participate. We have to get rid of some of the onerous barriers to access that exist in the medical production system, the unnecessary security requirements, the government micromanaging and requiring 800 or 1,000-page standard operating procedures to be provided in order to get a license. The government should be setting baseline standards that private enterprise has to meet. If you meet those standards, you get to participate in the illicit or in the new licit system. And that's how we do it. It sounds simple because it is simple, but we need to get rid of this sort of paradigm of considering people that are in the cannabis industry today as somehow criminals that we have to prevent from participating in the future. They're not going to stop. Why would they? Prohibition hasn't driven them out of business. Legalization certainly won't.
Time's up. Okay, Mr. Oliver.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for your testimony here today. And Mr. Rules in particular, it must be early in the morning there on Friday.